Good evening, everyone. Good morning to you, Gavin.
Good morning.
Um, on behalf of Flying Stories, I welcome you all. Um, Let me introduce our today's guest to you. Our today's guest is one of the expedition junkies in the paragliding world. He has sailed around the world twice, covering a mammoth 160,000 miles and staying in close to 100 countries. His life has nothing been but a roller coaster. He is a former US ski team member. He has been handed over a pair of skis when he was 18 months old, and he had dreams of becoming an Olympic ski racer ever since he learned to speak. In an unfortunate set of events, he crushed his knee in a ski accident in 1991 and thereby crushing his dreams of becoming a Olympic ski racer. Losing all hopes, he was forced to look for an alternative in his life. And did he not try different alternatives? He went to the B school without having any desire to work in a corporate. He rolled with the punches and went through 50 jobs by late 20s. In one of the jobs, he was fired by the same afternoon on his hiring day because he couldn't learn how to fold the clothes. He couldn't learn how to fold the clothes. He is now 48 years old and we still don't know if he can fold his own clothes. He started he started paragliding when he was 34 years old, and a sport that he first regarded as boring. He went on to feature 3 times in the world's toughest adventure rails, the Red Bull X Alps, and in the process also became the first ever American to finish the race. He has a hunger to fly the lines that no one has ever flown. He was the first ever, along with Will Glad, to complete 700 plus kilometers of wall beam through Canadian Rockies and was recognized as National Geographic Adventurer of the Year for redefining standards how this sport is measured. He took the challenge of paragliding wild Alaskan range of more than 750 kilometers, facing harsh weather, freezing temperatures, and even starvation. It's the most extreme wall beam expedition ever attempted. Many tried to stop him from attempting such a wild mission in the deep north. His flying partner left him due to prior commitments when they were just 60% through the route. And at the same time, his film crew left him because they ran out of money. But man, he was committed to his dreams. He relentlessly kept on with it and went on to become only human to fly the complete traverse of Alaskan range, proving everyone that no one can tell you how big you can dream. If there is any man who can teach you how to realize your dreams despite all odds, it is this man. His success is not just his ability to manage risk and take the road less traveled. As Jackie Robinson, Jersey number 42, quoted, a life is not important except in the impact it has on others' lives. Driven by his desire to share what he was learning, with as many people as possible, he has created a timeless repository of flying knowledge and wisdom by hosting and producing Cloud-Based Mayhem podcasts. He has interviewed some of the world's most luminous, renowned pilots, Krigel Maurer, Russ Ogden, John Baptiste, Theo de Blick, Paul Takats, to name a few. The content he is helping create will have a powerful rippling effect on pilots for generations to come. During his roller coaster journey, he also evolved as a person. And in 2017, he started the greatest adventure of his life as a father. With his better half, Matty, and daughter, Fallon, he now stays in Sun Valley. So, please help me welcoming the 2015 National Geographic Adventurer of the Year, the Red Bull Excel athlete, and through his podcast, arguably one of the most impactful pilots of our generation, Gavin McClurg.
Wow, that was an incredible introduction. Thanks a lot.
You are an incredible person, Gavin.
You got to send me that. You got to send me that intro. I'll just send that off of my sponsorship introductions.
What?
So, Gavin, so nice to have you here. I think we are all thankful for your presence here. So, let me start with the first question that has been running through my mind. A lot of us, or most people, even struggle to find one passion in life. You have gone through series of passions, especially when I read about that your dreams got crushed when you wanted to become a ski racer. How did you come over this aspect of finding one dream go away and then again finding the new dream?
It's a great question. I haven't thought about that in quite a while. You know, I think that because I was so dedicated to the ski racing. Well, number one, Alok, thank you very much for having me on your show, and it's great to see everybody and have this opportunity to talk to you all. Again, I apologize I was late. I had some internet trouble this morning, but it's great to be here, and it's great to talk to you all. Yeah, I think to answer your question though, I was so locked into ski racing, and my mom used to say, you know, I started skiing on the Heavenly Valley Blue Angels. This was the team that I joined when I was 6 years old. I'd been kind of raised on skis, and my mom said, for whatever reason, you know, even from when I started, when I was 6, just not going to the mountain wasn't an option. It was just, she just learned that was, you know, I would go crazy if she wouldn't take me to the mountain basically every day. And that kept up until the ski accidents, until I had the accidents and destroyed my knees. And so I was just completely fixated on it. I mean, I did many other things, but the ski racing was really the thing that was the real driver of my life until I had those accidents. And maybe it's been an attempt to kind of get back to that. I like competing. I like performing well or at the best that I can. And maybe it became kind of an addiction. So definitely after the ski racing, I went through a period of just, oh no, what's next? What's next? I mean, my whole life had been skiing for so many years, especially at that age. You can't imagine you're ever going to be 30, you know? And so I think that maybe my focus on other things came from that the focus on the ski racing, just always kind of trying to get to that point where you're really at a different level, maybe. But for sure, I've been very attracted to, you know, that my form of ski racing were the speed events, you know, downhill and super G, you know, definitely high speed, kind of high consequence. And most of the other sports that I've gotten really into, you know, whitewater kayaking for a few years at a really serious level, a very dangerous level, I guess you would say. And then climbing was the same thing for a bunch of years. And it was one of these things, for some reason, it was just all I focused on. You know, I've never been one of these jack of all trades. I just throw myself into one thing. And I can't say why. I just, I get completely enamored by a sport and try to figure out the best that I can. And if the difference with flying and all those other ones is the other ones I left because I felt like I got to a level that was really the best that I could get to. And so it became a little bit boring to continue to pursue. And it just lost its edge for different reasons. Kayaking, because I really, you've heard this story, I think, but you know, I really died in a waterfall, and I just got sufficiently scared that it became no longer fun because I couldn't figure out how to participate in it at a lower level. I wanted to always just keep pushing it, and the writing was on the wall. I wasn't going to probably survive doing it. Whereas with paragliding, I feel like I'm still a total newbie. You know, I just feel like I've got so much still to learn that I don't know that I could ever get to that point. So yeah, I think flying will outlast all the rest.
Yeah. And I think while through all these years, you definitely you also went to the B school, and definitely you were asked, you must have been given a lot of opinions to do this, do that. How did you keep yourself out of those pressures, you know, all the advices that you get throughout, and not ended up being one of the corporate junkies that you were pretty close to it, honestly?
I think that's habit. You know, I was definitely raised in a way with, you know, my parents were both, they divorced when I was really young, when I was 6, but I spent quite a bit of time with both. And in a sense, they were both very encouraging of me to pursue your dreams. Is a little too cliche. interestingly, like my mom really wanted me to have a corporate job and white picket fence and the whole thing. And it wasn't until I was on an exchange program down in Australia, and I took her backpacking. She was down there working, coincidentally, and we went on a backpacking trip. And that first night, you know, a little campfire, sitting under the stars in the Blue Mountains, was the first time in my life that I heard her say, "Oh, I get it now. I understand. I understand why you do the things you do. And it's always driven me crazy, but I get it now." And I've never heard anything different from her since. You know, that really changed her perspective that, oh, maybe, you know, because she's really of that generation. You get out of college, you get a job, and you work that job until you die. And that was the first time that she had really seen, like, whoa, maybe there's another way to do things. Not that and there's anything wrong with that other way. It's just that that had never appealed to me. My father was much more into jobs either on the entertainment industry or sport. He had been a professional golfer, and I had never took to golf, but he had definitely pushed the athletic side of things. And so, but really, I think it was more the ski racing showed me that there was maybe a different way, a different pursuit that could bear fruit. And when that ended and I started getting into climbing and kayaking and these other pursuits, part of it was that I learned how well you could live on very, very little. You know, I was doing these amazing journeys, adventures, expeditions, whatever you want to call them. Like we went to Mexico and to paddle, and we were trying to do all these first descents, and it was actually Mexico, Guatemala, a little bit of Honduras. And we were there for like 7 months and spent $1,200. You know, it was just so cheap to live off tortillas and avocados and paddle every day. And so I think part of it was just kind of creating a habit for, I got really addicted to just seeing the world and seeing what was out there. And so my life for many, many, many years became one of doing some job very intensely for a very short period of time and making just enough money to leave again and go again. And that really became a habit until the sailing thing started, which was when I was almost 30. And that was very much the same thing. It was basically just, how do I see the world and sail on somebody else's time? And so the business became one of taking people on the boat to see the world. And so, yeah, to answer your question, you know, that was a very long answer to a short question, but
No, no, it all makes
the
sense.
answer
Yeah.
is, yeah, the answer is it became habit. It became, you know, a habit of, you know, I mean, really, the best job I ever had the least pay. The best job I worked 4 seasons guiding and, well, really instructing for Outward Bound. You guys have probably heard of this, but it's like there's 2 big outdoor schools in the world, Outward Bound and Knowles, and I worked for Outward Bound here in the States and guided mountain and river trips. This was kind of in my mid to late 20s, which is a little old for an instructor. Most of the instructors were kind of coming out of college, but you know, it was $50 a day, and you take it was, most of my courses were 30-day courses with kids that were 16 to 18 years old, and you just teach them how to operate in the outdoors. You know, so in the beginning it's pretty hands-on, and at the end, near the last week, you're hiding from them. You don't even really see them. They're running their own trip. It's 10 students, 2 instructors, and again, just how cheaply you can go live in the outdoors off very little. But also just, I mean, I think those kids had more impact on me than the other way around. And just that, you know, childish curiosity with the world was really compelling. And like I said, the best job I ever had. Now, you're never going to get rich making $50 a day, but that was enough. I could work at Outward Bound for the summer and save up every dime I made and then go do stuff.
Nice, nice, nice story. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, people who go through such journeys, I think they get hit sometimes by some experiences that propel them so fast forward in their lives. And some of those key movements definitely happened through the journey that you had, no? So, yes.
Yeah, I mean the most instructive of those was definitely getting into the sailing. I just decided I didn't really have much experience, but I decided that my girlfriend at the time, Jody McDonald, and I, decided that this would be, a worthy pursuit. And what made it, in a sense, looking back, this putting it together was this monumental effort. It took a year, and but in a sense, it was easy because we didn't have anything to lose. When we set out on this, it was kind of like, well, let's build a little website. So I learned HTML and built a website, and let's just see if people would be interested in sailing around the world and paying us to do it. Because we didn't have a boat, we didn't have any money, but we had time and we had passion, and we thought, well, let's just dedicate a year to this. If it doesn't work, we'll really have no money because we'll have invested everything we have into this. But if it does work, we've hit the jackpot, and it worked. And so it's, sometimes you just have to step out on the end of the diving board a little bit and take a leap. But it's easier to take a leap when you don't have anything to lose. When you're not diving into cement, when you're diving into a little bit of water, you're going to be okay.
Yeah. Cool. I want to move a little bit fast forward, Kevin, to the time while we were discussing what topic should we talk about. Then something that came up was that you had your first ever Volbiv in India, in Manali, with um, John
Oh,
Sylvester, right?
yeah.
Can you walk us through that trip? Maybe till others will be able to relate to that part.
Sure. Yeah. So I've taken two trips to beer, and I don't remember now if it was 2009 or 2011. I went in 2009 and 2011. This is when I was sailing. And so we would try every year to stop somewhere. And I think actually in 2009 I know this, actually we were in Bali, and the boat was in Bali, and so beer was pretty close. And so we just basically closed up shop for a few weeks and went to beer in 2009 and hooked up with the Himalayan Sky Safaris guys. So Eddie Colfax and John Sylvester and Jim Mallinson and Debu. And we did a little trip with them, and just, it was beer. It was the first, I think it was the first 100K I ever flew, and it was just amazing. And so I couldn't wait to get back. And then in 2011, I don't remember where we had the boat then, but again, left the boat and came back to beer. Actually, in 2011, we might have been done with the sailing expedition then. I think we were. I think we were in Morocco, and went back to beer and hooked up with those guys again. This time we were working on an article. It wasn't really a guided trip. It was, we were working on an article with Outside Magazine for their trips. We had a guy named Thayer Walker with us, who was gonna, they were doing these tandem Volbiv trips and overnight trips. And so we were working on an article for Outside Magazine, and I was still very a newbie in terms of paragliding. I hadn't done any Volbiv, hadn't done any racing. I was, at that point I was doing quite a bit of cross country, and I had done, several flights well above 100K, but I was still very new. I was flying the Nivea Arctic 3, I think at the time, so an ENC. And John Sylvester, I don't remember how it worked into the thing, but he knew that I wanted to do some kind of bivvy or some kind of camping thing, and he's obviously the guy to do it with there. And he and I didn't have a sleeping bag. I didn't have any real bivvy gear with me, and so I just dressed up in my warmest clothes, my big down jacket and what I was flying with there normally. And we took off from beer and immediately dove over the back. Cloud base was pretty low that day. I remember squeaking through pretty close to the terrain through a couple coals, where you just could barely see through the coal. And so maybe cloud base was 4,000 or something. And, it's only 50K back to Manali, but it just blew my mind. It was such a different world. It was so big back there and so impressive. And these even huge, more massive features behind you where we were heading. And we top landed above Manali at about, I want to say it was almost 10,000 feet. Does that sound right? Yeah, it
Yeah,
was pretty
three and a half,
tall.
sometime. Yeah.
Yeah, and nice grassy field, easy place to slope land. And it was the end of the day. It was really beautiful. And John went around and did his thing and collected a bunch of wood and stuff. And he had a little stove, and he's British, of course, so he kept brewing tea all night. And and I can't remember if we even had food. I'm sure we had something. And it was so cold that uh, I kept the fire going all night because he had a sleeping bag. He had all his stuff, and I didn't have a sleeping bag. So I just curled myself around the fire in a little eggshell kind of thing and just kept the thing going all night. And at one point, I woke up and I was just encased in ice. Just had a nice thin layer of ice over my whole body, and it kind of cracked it off. And anyway, woke up in the morning frozen and got the fire going again. And we took off at, I want to say, like 9:30. It was really early in the morning, and it was east facing, and we immediately pinged up to like 12 grand and are about 4,000 meters. And I don't remember needing much more than one more climb, I think, after that to fly back into Beer. And so we flew over the launch at Beer, about 1,000 over the launch when everybody was still setting up. Nobody had flown yet. And it must have been 11:30. And everybody on the launch looked up and saw us and were like, where in the world are these guys coming from? What in the hell? And we went down and landed in town and got some lunch and went home and went to bed. It was just,
Wow.
it was amazing. And it was really the trip that sparked it all for me. My mind was blown for a year after that. And that's what led to, on that trip, I met Antoine Laurens. He was there. And that was what led to the Sierra Safari, which was the next big bivvy we did the next fall. That was 2012. And that was an 18-day bivvy across the Sierras from Waltz Point up to the Oregon border. But it was really that trip with John kind of sparked the whole thing.
Wow. Wow. We did our little journey this time with Antoine and Eddie
Yeah.
in the last autumn. And yeah, it was quite fun. They're quite fun company to have. Antoine, Eddie, and Debu. Yeah, so all
Oh,
of this.
those guys
So,
are just,
yeah.
those guys are the money. They're just
Yeah.
fantastic. And they know that area so well. And it's, to me, I've now had a lot of friends go over to Beer and do bivvy trips there. It's really one of the best places, if not the best place in the world, to bivvy, because you can top land in a lot of places. There's humanity in most little valleys and villages, and so you're very close to milk, water, food, whatever you need. Um, and there's no wind. There is wind, of course, like everywhere.
Yeah.
They're big mountains, but the mountains themselves, in the right time of year, are very safe. I mean, I know there's a lot of accidents there, like there are everywhere, because they're big mountains. And people make mistakes. But they're pretty tame in terms of the wind, and that's really nice. And so, I think what tends to get people when they're bivvy flying is getting into conditions. Often you don't have access to very good weather or none if you don't have any cell service. And so you're kind of reading it on the fly, and you can get yourself into, bad positions. Or what happens to a lot, I know in Beer and other parts of the world, is people hurt themselves trying to top land. And, but if you have the basic skills, if you have top landing pretty down, then it's just a perfect place to do it. And what I always recommend to people, and if you're not, if just don't rush top landing, don't, take your time, be willing to do 100 passes, wait for the right cycle, the right moment, don't force it in, or just don't top land, go land in the valley and be willing to hike back up. I mean, if you're going bivy flying, you should be reasonably fit to begin with. And, a hike in the morning is a nice way to spend the day. And so that's not a big deal to just, I don't have this move, go down, land in the valley. Our first big bivy trip, that after the one I did with John, the Sierra trip that we did in 2012, Brad Sander got really hurt the very first day trying to top land in a pretty dicey spot, and had a pretty serious accident. And that taught me real early on that, you just don't force it in. You don't want to be in a position where you've got to rely on emergency services or your friends to get you out. It's just not an option. So make sure you have the move, and make sure you do it safely, and just be willing to, like Nick Reese always says, never be unwilling to be inconvenienced. A hike is just a hike. It's no big deal.
Yeah. The problem is most of the pilots are lazy. They don't want to hike up, but we should get this aspect that it's not necessary to top land always. You can land anywhere in the valley, hike up, keep it easy for you. Don't stress yourself out.
Yeah. And there's something that I didn't realize early on, my first few years paragliding. I mean, I've always been fit because of, my athletic background, but, it's really a safety issue when it comes to flying. When I started training and getting real serious about the X Alps, part of that, it's not just so you can cover a lot of ground and be fast up mountains and be able to walk forever. I mean, that's certainly what the race is all about, but it's also just creating a lot of durability and resistance in your flexibility and durability and strength go a long way when you come in hard. And we're all going to land hard at some point in our careers and make, and have to do maybe a downwind landing or put it into a tiny little postage stamp. I mean, if you're flying cross country, that's just inevitable. And, in places like Beer, in India, you've got a lot of power lines and you've got a lot of terraced rice fields and stuff. And a lot of times when you are landing in the valleys, you are subjecting yourself to valley wind, and people get hurt all the time, landing in wind in those terraced rice fields because they'll get dragged into a little wall or something. If you're fit, it's the difference between bouncing and a trip to the hospital. If you're durable and you're strong, those hard landings can be the difference between just walking away and snapping something. So, I think as a community, we do need to take fitness pretty seriously, especially if you're flying cross country. It really does make a difference. And the other thing is, just like you said, it's the mental aspect. How many times do we bomb out because we don't want to leave a road? But the sky is saying fly deep, is saying fly somewhere else, where suddenly you're forced to fly the sky or leave the road. Well, if you don't care about walking, you're going to stay in the air.
Correct. I won't hold Gavin for too long so that I can open up for questions, because I'm sure people will have questions for you. There are some athletes who are within the country who are also preparing for hike and fly. So cool. I have the first question from Andy. Andy, please go ahead.
Thank you. Is this working? I don't know. I'm doing Zoom for the first time. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks a ton, Gavin, for the information. It's kind of an honor to speak to you. To begin with, I would say one thing. I'm just a beginner in the sport. I've just started doing this about a couple of years ago. One thing that I really feel conflicting when trying to pursue this is what's the difference between trying too hard and working hard. Now, the reason I'm saying trying too hard is to be passionate about it. Like, let's say you are in a thermal, you are trying to practice thermaling in early days. You stay up in the same thermal for half an hour, 45 minutes. You get a call from your landing, from your instructor, saying that, hey man, it's about time you land. You are getting fatigued. Probably you don't feel it because of the adrenaline, but at the same time you want to work hard, and you wanna try and like beat on the craft again and again, like you do in usual conventional sports, for example skiing or snowboarding. But when you get a call that, hey, it's time to land, time to go back, and you still want to go hard. So when do you as a beginner or as a pilot differentiate between hard work or trying to go over and above the safety limits?
I think that's one of the best questions, and the one of the hardest to answer, because to get good, you have to work at it like any sport. And the difference is we're aviating, so we're not skiing, we're not riding a bike, we're not skateboarding, where a crash is, a broken wrist or a broken ankle. What we're doing has really, really high consequence. And obviously everybody that gets into it knows it, but until you see, and you will, unfortunately, until you see your share of carnage, it doesn't feel like, we one of the five hazardous attitudes of aviation is immunity. You don't think it's going to happen to you. And until you see quite a bit of carnage, you believe that in a sense. And so then, it either happens to you or it happens to somebody you care about or you see, and it's a bit of a wake-up call. The trick is running that gauntlet safely. And I think the best way to run that gauntlet is to listen to your instructors, and then when you get kind of pushed out of the nest, find a mentor. And a mentor should be somebody who has flown a lifetime without an injury, or but is still really having fun. Because the trick to this sport is that if it's not fun, you shouldn't do it. So it should always be fun, because there's no reason not to if it's not fun, and there's just too high of consequences. And but you've heard that saying, there are old pilots and there are bold pilots. There are no old bold pilots. You have a lifetime to do it, so take your time. And one of the most important lessons I got was almost the exact same thing. It sounds like you're going through. I was just finishing up my P2 license. So that's in the US, we have a different rating system probably than you do, but P2 is like your novice, your lowest level rating, where you can go out on your own without an instructor talking to you on a radio. And I had basically ticked off all the boxes, and this was the last flight. It was a mountain flight, and I was dehydrated. I was tired. It was the end of the week-long course. Health and well-being and not enthusiasm, but where you stand at the moment, and try to start recognizing when you're not really tuned in anymore, and go ground handle, read books, hang out with better pilots, and push it and take some risk, but at a nice slow angle like this. Don't have these, because when you do this and you get freaked out or you get hurt, man, this sport pays a hard dividend, and you come way, way, way back down, and you got to rebuild. It's much nicer having a nice, slow, easy trajectory. I'm working on this book for the podcast, the first 100 shows, and we're almost done with it. It'll be out here pretty soon, but I don't know how many times people say, like I was asked that question, if you could rewind the clock to your 50-hour self, what would you do differently? Most often it's slow down. So be patient. This sport can't be rushed. No one can. It doesn't matter if you're Kriegel, no one can rush this sport. It takes time.
Right. I think the takeaway, as you said, is the curve. Keep it hard, but it's really hard as a beginner when you're really excited to go out and fly and explore all these things, and especially if you're competitive, like let's say in skiing or something. You just go out, do that thing daily, and try to get better. And similarly, you want to do the same thing in paragliding, but unfortunately, you have to control that. I'll quickly ask to the second question that I've been thinking about. As you mentioned that having a mentor really helps. Now, finding a mentor is not that easy, especially in any sport. Usually, I mean, if you're lucky enough, yeah, you can, but it could take some time. It comes at its own. It comes at its own perfect timing. Usually, as a beginner, you do spend a lot of money. Like you have to do some courses, you have to go travel to some various things, you have to buy your own equipment and everything. And if what I have found out, the biggest challenge that I see is that this is a very vicious cycle that one can enter into and not exit. That is, like, you keep on spending money in the sport. You know, you can keep on going to different tour operators, saying
Andy,
that, okay,
keep your
I
question.
wanna
Keep it to
guide
the
you.
question, Andy. Keep it to the question. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean, you can spend on guiding, you can spend on SIVs, you can spend on plenty of other things. Where do you actually come to a conclusion when you say that, okay, I have had enough information, I don't need to go to someone else, and I can do this myself? Like, probably be self-sufficient and do everything yourself.
I don't know that there's a very clean answer. I don't know there's a very clean answer to that, because every individual is different, and you have to know it kind of in here. You have to learn. What's really important in this sport is learning how to listen to that little voice that we all have. It's a very critical little voice, and in the beginning, that little voice is very easily confused with irrational fear. It might not be, there might not be anything wrong. It's just you're flying and it's kind of spooky. And so you have to learn to you have to learn to be able to parse between the little voice that's trying to save your life and the irrational fear voice that you just need to learn how to park in another place. Finding a mentor, I get that question a lot. Go drive for better pilots. Offer your services for retrieval. That, if anything, you'll make a little money, but you certainly won't spend any money doing that. And you want to just be around much better pilots as much as possible. And everybody should spend time in the early days in whatever way that looks like, that could get you around those people in a valuable way. Packing their gliders, offering trips up to launch, offering to drive retrieve for them. You get in a retrieve car with some good pilots after they've flown a couple 100K and drive them home, you're going to learn a lot. They're going to talk all about it. They're going to talk about what they did right, what they did wrong. You'll glean a lot of really valuable information from them. And so make yourself available. That's really the only way to get mentors. And then inevitably, if you're pretty cool and you help them out, then they're going to want to take you under their wing. Cost-wise, that's a different question, but you should really be able to get a lot of mileage out of wings these days, and the tendency for people to want to step up to a higher wing too early is really great, and you need to resist that urge. If you can't stay in the air for 8 hours on an ENB wing, you're not going to be able to on an ENC wing either. So you don't need to move up until you're totally out flying the wing that you're on. When you're bored and you're like, I'm pushing this thing to the max, I'm using the full range of the speed bar, it's never getting me, I can handle any situation on it, and I just need more performance to keep this sport exciting, that's when, you can start thinking about moving up. But if it's, man, I can't keep up with Gavin because he's on that END and I'm on this ENB, that's not the reason to move up. That's never the reason to move up. If you're not being able to stay up with the hot gliders because of your glide difference, that's annoying, but remember that the glider doesn't make you a better pilot. You become the better pilot. So you don't need to spend a lot of money in this sport. You can, you can get 2, 3, 4 years out of a glider. Now, if you start flying 300 hours a year, then yeah, you're going to have to spend money on gliders. But very, very, very few people that are able to do that. So, and yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think I have plenty of questions, which I'll shoot you an email regarding that. But yeah, thank you, Alok. I'm done.
Thank you,
Sure.
Andy. Yeah. So, Andy, I have some questions sent to me over the chat, but I think I can sum it up in a different way. Okay, we currently in India, we are a growing community in terms of hike and fly and the BV flying. And I was once also listening to one of your podcasts where we talked about threat and error management as well. How would you say would be the pointers for a growing community to go safely? Would growing with doing these trips together so that we also increase our threat awareness, because more people would mean, okay, we can see more things around and go around these small wall-beef adventures. How do we also considering the aspect that we don't really have the best search and rescue system in the country as well? How do we approach this wall-beef within the country in India?
Yeah, so I mean, as I understand, the inReach or spot isn't legal, but I personally wouldn't even consider going Volbiv or really XC really without one. So number one, your group needs a bomb-proof way of communicating, and you need a bomb-proof where everybody is. And the only way to do that, unless you have cell service everywhere, which you don't, is with an inReach. So you guys are going to have to get crafty about, keeping those hidden and using them anyway. And because there's just no way to do it. And you've got to, in your mind, you have to recognize that you're going from, maybe one of the, just flying around sledders. This is the opposite end of that. Going Volbiv is really the other extreme end of our sport, and it can definitely be done safely. And I want to be here to, you should all be inspired to do it. But like I said, it has the fitness aspect. It has typically you're flying light gear, which doesn't have nearly as much passive safety. And then you really need to have these communication systems pretty dialed and be working together in a way that, like I said, I personally wouldn't come on a trip if I didn't have if everybody in my group didn't have an inReach, and that's for my own safety as well. But, just trying to find somebody and deal with an incident without one, if that person doesn't have one, is brutal. And the other thing that you just said is true all over the world, even in a place like Europe where you've got helicopter rescue and that kind of thing. Most of the time it's us as a community that's first on scene and that has the best ability to take care of that situation. So, there are other things like wilderness first response training. And, like Andy said, that is an additional expense. It's not cheap, but, we should all have wilderness first response training, which is basically wilderness EMT training, because, if you have an incident and there's trauma in the backcountry, in a backcountry setting, it's often us that are going to be able to save that person or get them to a place where they can be rescued or get them out of that situation, him or her. So, now your question is more, how do you guys go about doing this? And, Stoke goes a long way. If you've got a group together that can, plan and coordinate, and you can put people in, hey, Johnny's really good at weather. Let's put him in charge of weather, whatever it is. If that, you can kind of split the responsibilities to an extent. That goes a long way, because as we all know, if we're on our own, sitting at home, and nobody's pinging our phone to go out and go flying, it's harder to go flying than it is when you're getting 20 calls a day and there's a lot of people excited about it. So I would ride that excitement the best that you can, use that to your guys' advantage, because you guys are, there's a group of you there, and the stoke is high. Do some dry runs. And by that, I just mean, like get together some night and pack your bags. What does it look like to take your pad out and put your sleeping bag in, and, get all your stuff all ready to go before you're actually setting out on a bivvy trip. Make sure it all works, because the logistics take some time to figure out what you need, what you don't, where it goes, where, what you should have on your butt versus what you should have on your back. Do some dry runs, do it together, like you guys can have like a reserve packing party and pack reserves. And in other words, develop the group dynamic a little bit before you just head out onto the bivvy adventure. And so you kind of know what people to put into what position, and, because there are natural leaders and there are more natural followers, and you want it to, the most important thing is to have fun and to have the right group dynamic, and not get midway through a trip and have somebody, spoiling all the fun for you. So, but I think a safety culture needs to be cultivated, and you need to talk about it, and you need to foster that, you're honest about the safety, and you're honest about the consequences. And, you want to be talking about that at the right time. You don't necessarily want to be Debbie Doomsday on the way up to launch and bringing everybody down and putting bad thoughts into people's heads. That whole crown suck mentality. But you do want to be honest about it, and and hopefully somebody in the group is like Debu or John or Eddie, or somebody with a lot of experience can help guide the group to an extent, and help the younger, newer pilots along a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good one. You were quite right. It is the conflict resolution as well that aspect that we should look at, because there are quite a few leaders in themselves as well, and everyone, after flying some hours, all of us may not be well aligned with each other's flying style, and in order to be together, it's important to develop these dynamics. No? So that's true. Okay, I have next question from Richard. Meanwhile, okay, Richard, please go ahead.
Hey, Gavin. Just on the packing a kit, I'm very wary of taking out my back protection. So I've been looking at all sorts of ways of how I can put how much stuff in front of me. But then I've also found that even just filling my flight deck too much can actually end up being a bit of a weight on my nuts. I don't really like the idea of too much weight. There. What have you found as the most effective way to pack without taking out back protection, or is it just simply a case of if you're going to want a vol bib, you're just going to have to suck it up?
Really, really good question. Until I got the Colibri, I thought you had to take the pad out. The Colibri is, barely lighter or barely heavier than an X-Alps harness, and I can leave my pad in and have all my kit. I've never actually been able to fill it up. So there are harnesses, I don't know other ones that work like that, but the Colibri is brilliant, and it's got a big pad. It's got a lot of passive safety, and so they've shaved weight in all the right places. So little shout out to them that you can keep the pad. If you have a harness that you just need the space, which are most, even my X-Alps, my Woody Valley X-Alps GTO, which in my mind is pretty much one of the most brilliant harnesses ever created. That's the harness I used on the Rockies Traverse, and then I used the Sup Air Delight too in Alaska. That one was pretty good. But both those I pulled the pad, and both those I was carrying a lot of gear. I think maybe with the GTO I could have gotten away with leaving the pad in. Yeah, probably not. But if you're gonna pull the pad, the way to pack is your sleeping bag, and the softest stuff you have is under your ass, you know, because that's how we get spinal injuries is hitting our ass. It's very rarely that we land on our back. So the methodology is your sticks up one side of your back, you know, so your walking sticks, your tent stakes up the other side of your back, and your sleeping bag on your back, you know, and that will create the comfort and the softness that you're kind of used to with your harness. And the sleeping bag isn't bad. It's not the passive safety of a pad, but it's at least it's something. And then under your butt, your sleeping pad, and your tent and anything soft under your butt. And then in that little extra compartment that they usually have for like ballast and that kind of thing, that's where your hard stuff should go. So your stove, your food, your water, you know, your water's also usually on your back, but in your carry compartment. But and you know, in other words, you got that in a place down in front where you're not going to hit that if you come in hard. So, but pretty tricky to not pull a pad with any reasonable level of bivy gear, you know, unless you can definitely get away with it like I did with John when I didn't pack a sleeping bag and I didn't really carry anything because it was just an out and back and an overnight. But as soon as you get into like 2 nights, then you're almost unless you have that Calibri or a harness that I'm not aware of, you're going to have to pull that pad. Some harnesses have a butt pad and a back pad. They're separate. And so in that case, get rid of the back pad and leave the butt pad. And at least that's some passive safety. But the bigger point here is that you're giving up some passive safety, and we need to be aware of that when we're bivy flying. So, you know, it's kind of like, to me, it's kind of flying in the times of Corona. I have been flying, and I'm not doing cross country. I'm only doing, you know, morning sledders and evening and a lot of hike and fly, and what I would consider, you know, much safer than driving a car type flying, you know, kind of the kind of flying where I know I'm not going to get hurt, but I'm flying in a way that I'm just giving myself a ton more margin right now, because I don't want to end up in an ER. I don't want to put any, you know, I don't want, you know, well, you know the reasons why. So, you have to fly that way when you're bivy flying. You just have to give yourself a lot more margin.
May I just very quickly follow up, Alok?
Yeah, go ahead.
And so you haven't tried using any sort of sling bags or anything like that over the front? You don't see that that is a feasible solution?
The only thing I've ever put on my front was my food bag, and that's because I couldn't fit it in my bag, and that was in Alaska, you know. So I don't like having stuff on my front. I have tried it. I don't like how it feels. I don't like how it monkeys with my flight deck. I haven't been able to make it work. I'm not saying it doesn't. I have seen it, and so I know it can, but I haven't been able to personally make that work for me.
Thank you.
Okay.
You bet.
I have some questions from about a series of questions sent to me from one of the pilots, Jatin. He is not able to speak currently, but let me summarize these questions for you. Now I know you had a well sorted support group for your Red Bull Excel race, Gavin. Bruce and Ben. Ben also has been training me with my endurance races. How should one go about finding a support group, and if you have any pointers towards it?
For hike and fly races?
For hike and fly races, yes.
Man,
what aspects? I mean, we definitely need to sort out the conflict resolution part. That is one of the things that I would rate really high. What kind of dynamics you have within the group itself, but how should still, yeah.
Let me answer the conflict resolution first, because I know how to answer that one. I got that advice from Tom Payne, who did the race in 2009, and then he supported John Chambers kind of from a distance in 2011 2011, and then he really supported him. He was on his team with John's dad in 2013, and that was the first when Bruce and I were going into 2015. So our first race, I went and sat down with him in Zurich and asked him that same question. And that was, sorry, no, I didn't. That was the first thing he said when we sat down. He was like, dude, number one thing you got to figure out going into this race is conflict resolution. And he said, I don't have an advice for what, but just make sure you have a formula for dealing with stress and anxiety, because there's going to be a lot of it. And what Bruce and Ben and I came up with, one, Ben was, he was in the Army, so he was in Iraq. Those guys know how to deal with conflict. They're trained to deal with conflict. And so our methodology was that we laugh about everything. That's how we resolve conflict. Is so if we make a mistake, if we have a problem, we identify it, we talk about it, we laugh about it, and we move on. It never comes up again. There's never any blame. Number one, I'm always the one making the mistake, so there doesn't need to be any blame on them. But basically it's, and not all teams are like this. There are very, very serious teams, and we are very, very serious about the race. We want to win, and we do everything we can to win. But we, in terms of how we deal with anxiety and stress, is we laugh about it. And that works for us. I kind of figure that you put so much into these races, you better have a good time, because it's going to be a while before you get to participate in it again, and you're working pretty darn hard. So you might as well have fun. So that's how I deal with conflict resolution. Finding a team. I got really lucky. I don't know that, we lost Bruce in 2017. And so, in 2018. And so he's no longer with us. And so now I've got Revis and Ben and Keith. People often don't know about Keith because he's kind of behind the scenes, but he's a guy that was with us since my best Odyssey days, my sailing days. So I've known Keith for years and years and years. I would say it's more important to have people that you really get along with necessarily, than really their skill level. That's really important, but it kind of depends on what you need, so maybe it's easier for me to just talk about my own team a little bit, so I've got we've already always divvied things up into is basically my flying guy and my ground guy. Ben is obviously my ground guy. He does all my training, and he's doing all my ground navigation, and he's helping me hump my stuff when it's possible to do that. You got to carry the mandatory gear, but he can carry my extra water, my extra food, my extra clothes, all that kind of thing. And so that's super helpful. Most teams these days have that person, that kind of your that physical person. And now the other side, and the nice thing about having somebody like Ben or like you have training, he also knows what I'm capable of because he's designed all my training. So he knows how hard I can push. And that's pretty helpful in the race. And, so when those guys are doing all their calculations, when I'm coming into a landing or that kind of thing, they're figuring out, okay, how fast is he going to be able to get to the next launch? How fast is he going to be able to get to the next campsite? How much terrain can he cover? And so they can plan around that. Your air guy or girl needs to be someone, and that's really dependent on you. Are you more Kriegel-esque and you like to make all those decisions on your own and you know the terrain really well? Or are you more like me where I like to hand off any brain power decisions to my team? I'd like to make as few decisions as possible so I can save that bandwidth for when I'm flying. And so Revis and Bruce are amazing at Google Earth and technology and weather and getting me to places that I can get off the hill, not putting me in a spot where I can't launch and got to walk back down. I can't walk back down because I got bad knees. And so that's really dependent on you as an athlete and what you kind of need. Are you the kind of person like Hansa, for example? He he got going in the morning and he didn't really care about seeing his team until night. He just wanted to have an adventure in the mountains all day and do it on his own and be fed when he needed to be fed. And that was about it, so he had very, very little communication with his team during the race. I mean, during the day.
Does that not frustrate his team?
No, I don't think so. I think they really liked it. I mean, he had different teammates over the years, so I'd have to check in with them and see, what worked and what didn't. But, Hans is not really into technology, and he is a meteorologist. So, but he preferred to just look out the window to get the weather, and rather than getting too much information. And that's important. It really is one of the things that we learned, in the first one and the second race working with Bruce, was that unless the information's pretty critical, I don't want to hear about it when I'm in the air. I don't want to be futzing with my instruments and answering WhatsApps and getting too much information, because it robs me of my observation. And that's the key to flying for everybody. I don't care if you're Kriegel or anybody else. You want to keep things pretty simple, because you want to be observing what's keeping you in the air, the clouds, the smoke, the birds, all that kind of stuff. And if you're worried, if you're getting too much info, it's just too much. So, like Revis and I have an agreement that unless it's something that he thinks is possibly going to kill me, I don't want to know about it. I want it positive. I want it optimistic. And I want only what's critical. So, I'm getting my full weather briefing in the morning during breakfast or some, time that really works. And then after that, when I'm in the air, if I'm hearing from him, I basically want encouragement. I want critical information. But we don't want to rob ourselves from what keeps you in the air. I don't know if that answers your question totally, but, I think personality is the number one thing that I would look for. That's more important than maybe their skills.
Yeah. And how does it work for you? For example, you have 4 to 5 days in the race. Now you're super tired. No, now mentally you're much more exhausting now. Now, at this moment, what do you think gets you going at this point? And you train for it specifically, that after 6 days time, I'll be really, really tired now. And now my decision making is going to get affected in some ways. How do you go through training this aspect along with the team as well?
I would actually say that if you train well, that's not actually what's going to happen. If you train for it correctly, then I never noticed real noticeable dips in my energy level. Certainly that's happening. Well, of course it's happening, but it's more from the lack of sleep than it is from the physical exertion if you've trained well. And what I would recommend is doing simulations in the months that lead up to the race. So 6 months out or 7 months out, do like a 2-day simulation. So what I mean by that is simulate the amount of sleep you're actually going to get in the race. So wake up when you're going to be waking up in the race, eat the same food, do the same amount of labor in terms of physical labor that you're going to anticipate in the race, fly or do something else. If it's winter, obviously for me, that would be January, and there are no thermals in January in where I live. It's winter. And so, it's not going to be the flying side of it, but it's going to be the waking up at 5, out the door at 5:30, 2 hours on the road, break, breakfast, weather briefing, ski tour for 5 hours, but mellow, so something that kind of simulates an actual day. And then, a wind down, stretch, I have to do a little bit of mobility before I go to bed, and then in bed at 11. And then the neks morning you do the same. And so however the race that you're training for, some allow more sleep than the X Alps does. And so try to do, you know, a 2-day simulation in January, and then do a 3-day simulation in February, and then do a 4-day simulation in March. You see where I'm going with this. And get up to where, you know, get up to like maybe a 4 or 5 day simulation. I don't think you need to go beyond that, even if it's the X Alps and it's 12 days. Because anyway, so yeah, I think that the biggest thing that kicks people's butt is lack of sleep. And you know, you need to be real good at, be very good at caffeine use, be very good at sugar use, be very good at whatever diet you're going to do for this race. Think about that months in advance. Are you trying to be like fat adaptive? Are you just good with whatever? You know, are you trying to do a high protein? Are you trying to do a heavy carb? You know, there's a lot of different ways you can go with this. But what I would just say is do it way in advance. Some of you probably heard the story about me in 2015. I did way too much sugar. You know, I was constantly feeling like I was going to bonk. So I was constantly eating goos and Coca-Cola, and it just ravaged my liver. It did something. And so I had a ton of, I had a massive amount of inflammation. And at night, my body would just be trying to dump all the trauma from the day. I'd get so totally swollen up and then sweat like crazy. So that was affecting my sleep quite a bit, but then it was also forcing me to take a ton of Advil to try to reduce the swelling. Well, that's not very good for your liver either. So it was the double punch of the sugar and the Advil that was destroying my internal processes. And I just became a swollen bag. So my feet got like 3 sizes bigger than normal, and they couldn't fit in my shoes. And so it just kept getting worse. Funny though, that was my best race, but in terms of position. But yeah, what I'm saying is you need to kind of figure all these things out and get it pretty dialed so you have a smoother race. But the point is, if you train well, you know, you're not going to experience the kind of fatigue that you're worried about as much. You know, you're going to be tuned, and your body's going to be ready for this. If you're working with Ben, you don't have anything to worry about, man. You do the work, you're going to be okay.
Good one. I have next question already lined up. Naveen, go ahead, please. Be mindful of the time, Naveen. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Hello, can you hear me clearly?
Hi.
Hi. So my question is like, I just want to know about your personal progression from basic to two-liner, and did your past sports, adventure sports like sailing, did help it a lot for the fast progression from the basics to the two-liner and the competition?
Yeah, in a sense, this is not what I would recommend, but in a sense, I was forced into a higher aspect wing before I was probably ready for it now, which just sounds ridiculous. But so I was flying the Arctic, the ENC in 2012. And up until that point, I think I'd had a pretty reasonable progression. I was flying a lot of hours. I was ragging out my wings pretty good. You know, I was doing a lot of SIV and a lot of over the water training and a lot of grounding. I was crazy about it. I still am, but I was really, you know, I was training even though I didn't even know what that was back then. You know, I was trying to put in the time, and at the same time, I was very cognizant that I've always been like this in all my endeavors. I have a pretty high risk threshold, and I push things really hard. And so I was trying to be smart, but I was starting to hear from my mentors that I was pushing too hard. You know, for example, I would show up, Bruce was really a wing nut for a bunch of years. He was really pushing. He got like 3 years in a row, he was getting over 500 hours a year. And you know, he and I would show up at like Fiche, you know, which is a really famous mountain site in the Alps. where on a good day, there's 200 pilots there. And we'd show up there day after day after day with nobody there. We were the only ones there. And that is a very good telltale that we were flying on days that were not very recreational days. They weren't good days. So we were pushing it, is my answer to your question. And what happened was, that put me on a two-liner was I came home that summer. I was in the Alps training with Bruce, and I came home that summer to compete in my first contest, my first race to goal, which was in Chelan. And I raced it on the Arctic, and I did pretty well. I didn't know what I was doing, and but I made goal one day when it was really hard. Very, very few people made goal, and I was doing what I did. I was just flying. I mean, I wasn't in goal with the leaders by any means, but I got into goal, and very few people got into goal. So I ended up doing pretty well in this race, and I got the bug, and it was super exciting. And I thought, wow, I need to do more contests. This is amazing. I learned so much, and I flew with Josh Cohn and Nick Grease and all these guys that I'd heard so much about and never met. And so that was really exciting. And then that same summer, that August, there was a World Cup here in Sun Valley. And I didn't live here yet. I was still in the Alps. I was just getting done with the boat thing. And the guy that was organizing the contest heard that I was moving to Sun Valley, which I was. I was moving there in August, which was the same time the World Cup was. He heard I was coming, and so he got me a wild card to be in the World Cup. So an organizer gets 5 wild cards. So in other words, you haven't earned the right to get into the race. You just get a slot in the race. And so because he knew I was moving to Sun Valley and I was going to be a local, and there's only a few pilots here, he gave me a wild card like a week before the World Cup. And so I'd competed in one contest on an ENC, and then I got into the World Cup. And I was like, holy cow, I can't race in a World Cup if I'm not on a comp wing. I got to have a comp wing. And so I called Nivik and begged them for an ice peak. And they had one that they could lend me, and they sent me an ice peak. And the day before the World Cup was the first day I'd ever flown an END, let alone a comp wing. So this is an Ice Peak 6. By today's standards, a pretty tame comp wing, but in its day, it was the wing. And so I flew that the day before the comp, and Nate and I went out and did a little 100K FAI triangle at way above Class 1 airspace, which is 18,000 feet. I'd never been above like 14,000. I'd never used oxygen. I'd never flown a comp wing. So basically the answer to your question is I did it totally wrong. I should have never done any of those things, any one of those 3 things. And it was amazing. It was one of the most fantastic flights of my life. With Nate, every 10 minutes he'd get on the radio and he goes, "Welcome to Sun Valley," and I had never flown here. And then I flew in the World Cup, which was incredible. And that actually went pretty well. And from that, I qualified for the super final, and I went to Columbia and got my ass kicked. So, I had a little bit of early success, and then I learned that, wow, it actually takes a lot of time and a lot of hours, and I needed a lot more training, and I wasn't that good. But so terrible. Nice, Aaron McLaughlin. Anyway, so the answer should be to your question to take your time and don't move up to the next wing until you really are bored of your wing and you really feel like you can handle more performance, and you really you're basically bored. Don't do it because you're tired of getting left on glides by guys and girls on better gliders. That's not the reason to move up. You need to be pushing your wing to the absolute limits, and you're like, this isn't enough for me now. And hours, we all need to log every flight we make and keep track of our hours and keep a journal or a logbook and be, make sure that you're current. I don't really think that unless you're getting 150 hours a year, you're really putting in enough time to justify moving up to a higher performing wing. like I said earlier, if you can't stay in the air for 6, 7, 8 hours on an ENB, you're not going to do it on an ENC either.
Okay, Kevin, thanks a lot. This answers my question a lot. That comping story is really, really interesting. Just one day before. Thank you.
I'll make it, if you want, I'll give you even a funnier version of it. So one day in the World Cup, I think it was like day 2, we launched and I was in perfect position and start. And then it was kind of starting to OD and a little bit of hail, and they canceled the race. And so I went and landed at my house, which I had just moved into. There isn't really an LZ, but there's a place that I could land just down the street from here. And I landed, and like I said, this was like the 3rd day on the ice peak, and my B, you know, the B risers, there's a strap that goes up and through, and one side of it kind of twisted, and I was so dumb, and I'd never flown a 2-liner. I didn't realize that you could just kind of work it and get the webbing straight again. So what I ended up doing was I took the B Malon off, and part of that system was my brake. Let's see. Yeah. It was, anyway, I had to take a Malon off, and when I put it back together, because in my mind I was like, that's how I had to straighten this thing out. And so I took it off and put it back together and kited the wing, you know, and it was kind of windy, and I kited the wing and everything looked fine. Next day I go, this is so embarrassing. So the next day I go up, and our launch is pretty intense. It's called Double D. It's got for Dust Devil, and it's pretty strong. And it was a big day. It was a big booming day. And I launched, and I had reversed my brake and my B line. So on the left side of my wing, my brake is my B and my B is my brake. So every time I pull on my brake, it would cravat the middle of the wing, the B lines on it. You know, the 2-liner. There's only the A's and the B's. And so it was totally weird. It was not nice. Basically, I couldn't turn that way. I mean, I'd had to reach up, grab the B, which was the brake, to turn that way. I couldn't do it. So, and it happened to be a left turn day. So what should any reasonable pilot, like remotely reasonable pilot, would top land or just go land in the valley and call it a day, right? I don't have this day, but me, I'm like, oh, it's a World Cup and I'm doing well. And so I flew that stupid thing like that. And so because it was a left-hand day, so we head out on start, and I didn't fix, I couldn't fix the wing, and I didn't top land or consider like, maybe this isn't my day and I should just go land. And again, I shouldn't be putting this out there. I'm not encouraging any of you to do something so stupid like this, but because I was so excited, I flew it like that. And so I get in the gaggle, and it was a left-hand day, so everybody's going left, and I would be like, hey, can you go right? Can you go right? And everybody was like, what in the world? What's wrong with this guy? And later on, I heard that, people were talking about, man, your wing didn't look right. It had this big crease in it on top. And luckily, about an hour and 10 minutes into the flight, it started ODing, and they called the race, and we landed, and it didn't matter. It didn't count anyway, but maybe it did count because it was over an hour, but whatever, it doesn't matter. But yeah, the point is, make sure your wing is rigged right.
That's really,
wow, what a story, Gavin.
What a story. That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin, for sharing this. Really, really thanks.
Sure.
I have one question coming in again, but this is more like a generic question. How do you go about planning the projects like Alaska? I know Alaska was your dream project kind of stuff. How do you go about planning a project like Alaska? Things such as funding, sponsorship, marketing, etc.
Oh man, big question.
It's a big one. Yeah.
I've written about this. It might be easiest to answer this by going to my website. If you go to my website, cloudbasedmayhem.com, and put in sponsorship, you're going to find some articles on this. The other place to put, and you'll have to write this down, folks that are listening, I wrote a series on how to get sponsored before I was a paragliding pilot, actually. This was for the boat business that I still have. And that's offshoreodysseys.com. And that's ODYSSEYS. So after we do the talk here, go to that site and Mayhem and put in the search term sponsorship, and you'll see these come up. I'm not even really sure those nail it on the head anymore. Let me try to answer this in a concise way. Sponsorship's really hard, and to make money with it in our sport is virtually impossible. There are very, very few people making that work. So getting gear is one thing that's more possible, but getting money to be paid is it's not like the sport used to be. Back in the 90s, you could get your travel expenses paid, and you could make money for depending on where you finished as a result. Now I'm talking racing, I'm talking World Cup, not, and super final type stuff, then not so much, content. But basically it's content, and it's being an influencer, and it's having a platform that people listen to and, feel like you're an authentic voice. But I really like what Will Gadd says is, you don't do things to get sponsored. You get sponsored to do things. That's a very, very important distinction. If you're doing stuff to get sponsored, you're going to pound. And that's just not you're not on the right end of that equation. So, like with Alaska, I was super passionate about making that happen. And I was going to go do it by myself and eat squirrels if I had to. But I was relentless. And luckily I had done that Red Bull project, the Rockies Traverse, through, with Will Gadd, and that was very, very successful for Red Bull. And so I had connections to the right people, and I was able to, leverage that. And I had been to Alaska a bunch and sent them a lot of photos, and I basically showed them that I had it really well planned out. And I showed them that. Whether I did or not is another question. I mean, basically, they knew that I was going to pursue that thing to my death. They knew that I was super passionate about it, and that meant a lot for them. And I got lucky, and a lot of it is lucky. A lot of it's, right timing, when these people need a project. That is, the Red Bull Explorer Series doesn't exist anymore. I wouldn't know how to take a project like that and make it happen these days to anybody. I mean, those were both $500,000 films, and I don't know, there aren't that many players in that space. And so to answer the question more specifically, most of the time, 99.9% of the time, it's better to get a job and buy stuff and go do what you want to do than it is to try to toy with the sponsorship game, because it's a hard game to play. And even just, most of the companies we're thinking about, whether it's harnesses, wings, that kind of thing, these people's margin is so tight that to even try to get a harness or something is really difficult. And most of the time it's an equation that doesn't work out for the company, that most of the people that confront them and ask them for stuff, they're not going to deliver. They're not going to deliver the content that partnership requires to make it worth it. And it's not a relationship that's going to bear a lot of fruit. And so, you have to be good at it. You have to be good at being a content provider. You have to be creative. You have to be thoughtful. You have to know how to take a picture or get content or take a video or get people to work with you that do. And that can get expensive. And so, you need to, basically my answer is, you need to treat it as a job. It's a job. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of work. And it's often more fruitful to just go get a paying job and take some time off and go have one than it is to create the content. The other thing I will say to be aware of is the pressure that cameras put on you as an athlete, as a content provider, whatever it is. social media is making our sport a lot more dangerous, for sure. That cameras make people do weird shit that you normally wouldn't do. And so, I learned a lot from Will Gadd working with him, because he had done so many what he calls rodeos over the years that he doesn't allow cameras to add any pressure, and that takes a lot of practice. And you just need to be really aware of this, that you're definitely putting yourself more at risk if you're playing that game, because we are humans and we have egos, and our egos make us do stupid things.
Wow. Words of wisdom, guys. Words of wisdom. Yeah. Gavin, how are you doing with the time? We have few more questions in, but I want to be mindful of your time.
I have 10 more minutes. Sorry, I've got a plumber coming. I'm doing a bathroom remodel, so he's showing up at 8. So yeah, I've got 10 more minutes, if that's okay, guys.
That would work, Gavin. Okay. So next question, I will hand it over to Rohit. Thank you very much, Gavin, for your time. Rohit, go ahead.
Hey, Gavin, this is Rohit, long-time listener and a regular subscriber of your podcast. Great content.
Thank you.
I have a question. Over the years, we have really some top quality pilots talking about their safety approach. Some of the rules they talked about, if 3 things have been going wrong, think about your day, or different approaches. If you have to summarize that a lot, with your extensive experience doing some of this adventure sport, not just in paragliding, you have been doing a lot more before that. What would be your summary to us about this safety thing, which, over the years, still we can't get a good handle on?
That's a great question. It's timely, because actually the chapter I'm working on in the book is how to avoid accidents. And so I was just reviewing this last night. I was amazed when I went back and listened to all the first 100 shows again for the book, and had them all transcribed. And I've been working on these go on, talk about listening to that inner voice. And it wasn't until I put the chapter together, this literally was yesterday,
Cool.
that I realized that that's actually what I do. It wasn't so gelled for me in that way until I went back and looked at all this. But a lot of us old timers talk about that. I guess I can call myself an old timer now. My first real vivid experience with that was the kayaking story that I know some of you have heard, when I basically died in this waterfall when I was 25. And that was the first time that, it was that whole trip, months before that accident on this trip when we were doing all this kayaking and really intense class 5, class 6 stuff. I had this little guy on my shoulders going, "You're going to die. You're going to die. You're going to die. You are not coming home from this trip." It was really intense and super scary. And it was not irrational fear. I was pushing the limit. I was paddling way beyond my skill level, and something inside me was trying to save my life. And so that was the first time, and it needed me going off a waterfall and literally dying for me to listen to that voice. And ever since then, I've tried to be a lot more attuned to that. Like I said earlier in the show, the trick is, especially when you're new, is deciphering between the little voice and irrational fear. And because fear is a very good thing, it keeps us alive, but irrational fear seizes us up. We don't want irrational fear when we're in the sky. We want to be able to think and process and plan and do the right things. We don't want to overreact, which is what often irrational fear makes us do. So the answer is learn to listen to that little voice, learn to back away. The most critical thing we all need to learn as pilots is when not to fly. And that's always okay. I guess that's my point, is that's always okay. I've had several scenarios in my flying career, some of them in the X-Alps and some of them just pushing it, where you get into that situation where you wish you could be on the ground and you're in the air, and there's nothing worse than that. And so I think we all need to be a lot more attuned to the long game in this sport. And that means being okay and not kicking our helmet when we land and flying another day. And that for me, more and more comes from the little guy that's sitting on my shoulder. And that little guy's just trying to keep us safe. And that little dude's all right. And so learn to listen to it. Learn to listen to that. Now, the last caveat is, I think probably like all of you, there's also that little voice when you're up on the way to launch or you're in the air that just imagines the worst shit possible. And I don't know where that one comes from,
The butterflies in stomach.
Just, oh my God, you just see yourself splatting on a rock, and you're in the air and it's a perfect day. And there's no reason to have that thought. That's the one you need to set aside. And I don't really have any advice on,
Differentiating
between those two. But I think that's a skill that we could also, build up. It's spring right now in the Northern Hemisphere. This is every year I go through this. I'm actually pretty tuned up this year because I've done a lot of comps and back in January and VIA and stuff. And I've flown a lot of hours, but when I go out right now in the spring, I'm just a lot more
cautious,
uncomfortable than I will be in July. And July is going to be way spicier here and way stronger here, but it's just how it always is. And I always have to go through that time. And so when I'm in those stages and when I'm not really there here, I try to give myself more margin. I try to fly on the better days. I try to not push it. I try to give myself more height. I try not to have low saves. I'm trying to do that more and more, just period, all the time. Like I used to kind of be like, hey, I got another low save. That was so cool. That just means I suck. That's not a good thing, So try not to be that pilot. Try to be the pilot that doesn't have incidences, I'm more and more convinced that my neighbor, Matt Beechner, farmer, he's never had an accident. He's a full Jedi. I mean, he can show up at a comp and after having a 25-hour year, and he's always the one to beat, always. He's so good. And gliding and climbing, everything. He was in the podcast. He's number 2 or number 3, I think, in the podcast. But he's also so safe. He just doesn't, he ground handles constantly, but he's just constantly making good decisions. And so find mentors like that and emulate them, because I've learned a lot from him. We don't need to push it. I'm convinced of this. I thought we had to really push it to get really good. I don't think that's the case.
Fantastic answer, Gavin. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Gavin. Rakesh has been asking for a long time. I couldn't put him in queue earlier. Rakesh, please go ahead with your question. Please be mindful of the time, Rakesh.
Hi, Gavin.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My question is a bit opportunistic question. It's not maybe helpful for everybody. I apologize for that. You earlier mentioned the Kotel Colibri harness, and I recently got Nova Somnium harness, which is the same design as the Kotel Colibri. And I recently got it, just 3-4 flights on it, and I find it that it moves too much for me. It's coming from a pod harness, a hammock pod harness, and I find myself as a passenger. And how do you think? How long does it take to get used to this? And how good and efficient this split leg seat of the Colibri design is compared to a hammock?
Sorry, I meant you're flying the Osium or you're flying the Colibri?
Not the Osium. I got the Nova Somnium.
And that's a split leg. That's like the Colibri.
It is exactly same as the Colibri. They
okay.
Colibri tied with Nova to make that harness.
Yeah. Okay. But you have flown in the past hammock harnesses without a seat board.
Yes. For a few years on a Delight hammock.
A Delight. Okay. Man, good question. if it's really like the Colibri, I don't know. So Max Jean-Pierre, the designer of Colibri, one of the designers, told me down in Argentina when we were at the World Cup this fall that getting used to that split leg was, for a lot of people, really weird. I personally haven't found it that strange. I found it okay, and I don't. I know what you mean by feeling like a passenger, but I haven't felt it that much on that harness. Now, maybe I haven't flown it in very rough air so far because I don't have a ton of hours on it, but I don't have a firm answer to your question except a general one, and that is that, you know, the move these days for a lot of pilots is to go really lightweight. And I think that many people, I'm not saying you, but I think many people are forgetting that there's a huge compromise there. You know, flying without a seat board is just not as good, ever. I mean, a hammock harness is never going to put you in touch with your wing as well as a seat board will. You're not going to have the command, you're not going to have the authority, and you're not going to have the feel. And so that's you know, obviously I'm like you, I fly a lot of hammock harnesses because I do a lot of hike and fly racing, and it's just, you know, I can't afford the weight. But if you're flying a high-end wing, I don't think we should fly high-end wings with a hammock, just period, any hammock. You know, if you're flying a two-liner, you know, if you have an incident, you need to react super fast and correctly to keep it from going into a cascade. And I just don't think a hammock harness gives that to you. Now, you know, I flew the Strike in 2015 on the Ice Peak 7, not a light version. It was just the normal Ice Peak 7. And so, you know, I'm not a living proof of this, but I will stand by that advice, is that you know, we are compromising not just passive safety, but our authority with the wing by going super lightweight gear. So that's A. B, it might be as simple as, you know, adjusting things a little bit differently, you know, like maybe bringing in your chest strap a little bit narrower, you know, so it's not so herky-jerky. That might help that. The split leg, yeah, Max told me that the split leg definitely takes some time to get used to. Like I said, I haven't had as much trouble with mine, but he definitely put that out there as a caveat, that a lot of people struggle with that in the beginning, and it's just a matter of figuring out, you know, like when you're paddling a new kayak, figuring out your hips and your weight shift, and maybe having a little bit looser lower torso to balance that out. But yeah, I don't know if I have a firm answer for you on that. I think it's just going to be time.
Okay. Would you say, does it have any advantages, split leg over a normal harness?
Yes, according to Max, it did. I don't remember what it was. You had more. God, what did he say? Send me an email on that. He answered me that. He answered that for me when I was down. You know what? I believe it's in the bonus podcast I did. That was the Ask Me Anything show, the recent one. You know, it was a couple months ago. I had Max on the. He was one of the people that answered the questions. I believe he talked about that. Go back and listen to that one, because we also talked about lightweight harnesses. And he's much more articulate about this than I am.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
You bet. Good luck.
Thank you.
Gavin, I think we are very close to wrapping up. Can you help everyone here? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so the podcast is Cloud-Based Mayhem, and so if you listen to the podcast, if you listen to podcasts, just do a search for Cloud-Based Mayhem. It's iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, it's in all the platforms. It's in all those. My website is cloudbasedmayhem.com, MAYHEM. And so I do quite a bit of writing there on many of the subjects we just discussed. So you can go get lost in the website for a while. There's tons and tons of content there. I'm not on Facebook very much, but I put all the shows on Facebook, and you can find me there just under my name, Gavin McClurg. You can find me on Instagram. I am a little bit more active on Instagram. I put posts up there about various whatnots. And that's also just my name, Gavin McClurg. And the films you can Google. They're all online. They're all free. And so the big ones, the Red Bull ones, are the Rockies Traverse and North of Known, which is the Alaska one. I highly recommend both those. They're beautiful and in crazy parts of the world, and they were big budget films. One of my favorites is still the one that launched all that, and the question about getting sponsored, what set all that off was a film we did called 500 Miles to Nowhere. And that was a bivvy attempt, total failed attempt, terrible weather, from Utah up to Jackson Hole. And that was a 7-minute film that we self-budgeted. That was, we spent like 20 grand on that. And so we put together sponsors but that was all filmed with Red cameras. It was real high production value, and it did really well in all the big film festivals like Banff and Telluride and stuff. And that's still one of my favorites. It's just beautiful. So Google that, 500 Miles to Nowhere, if you want some inspiration. And that's all about bivvy flying. And that was kind of what really set it off. And then from them, you can go down the rabbit hole and see a bunch of the other films and stuff I've done. But yeah, any of those. And then also, by the way, I do get massively inundated with questions these days. I do try to answer all of them, but you can always reach out to me personally through the website on the contact page there, and ask me questions and that kind of thing. I may not be very speedy in getting back to you because, like I said, I'm inundated these days. I get a ton, but I really do try to personally answer those, or at least point you in the right direction. I don't know everything, guys. I'm just, I'm just a monkey, but I'll try to do my best.
Thank you, Gavin.
Thank you.
Wow, it was a great session, Gavin. It was a great talk. To everyone here, Gavin is an example of dedication. Put the hard work, no shortcuts. The way he deals with risk to reward ratio, creating those crazy records and doing these expeditions needs really wisdom, skills, and intelligence, guys. Out of the flying world, I think he's also one of the most helpful folks that I have found. Whenever I posted questions to him, he has replied me back. And please go back, watch his videos. He has good taste in his videos as well. Thank you very much, Gavin.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
If everyone can come on. Yeah, and Gavin. Yeah. I think he's left.
Thank you, Gavin.
Thank you, Alok.
Thanks, Gavin.
Thank you, Alok. Thank you, Badri.
Thank you,
कारण त्यांच्याकडे मॉल्स होती मॉल पण बनते सुशीलमध्ये मॉल पेक्षा जास्त मार्केट
So how was it, guys?